Oh, banyak sekali. Lagi belum?
Kok kayak gitu?
Kan maksudnya supaya kamu langsung belajar dulu ya. Itu cara kapit. Pasti kamu kena.
Tapi tap aja.
Oke.
Gimana sih? Aduh. Oh iya, kan Coffee kan
Hey
stylenya
everyone, in this lesson we are just going to be setting up our project a bit. We're going to be importing some of the assets we need as well as setting up our folder structure. If you are using the included project files that come with the course, then you can skip over this lesson, but this is just going to explain a bit about the folder structure and some of the assets that we are going to be using inside of this project. So to begin, you might notice that there is a folder already called Scenes, and this gets created automatically with newer versions of Unity, and inside of that we have a sample scene. This sample scene is just like the default scene in Unity. It has a main camera and a directional light. But for us, we don't really need this. We only need 2 new scenes. And these scenes are going to be the game scene and the menu scene. Now, to create a new scene, we can just right click down here in the project, go create, and scene. And we are going to be calling this one game. And in the game scene, this is just where we are going to have basically all of the gameplay for our game, wherever we can move around, jump, kill enemies, that sort of stuff. That is all going to be inside of the game scene. With the sample scene here, we can actually delete this as we won't be needing it anymore, so we can delete that. And then let's just double click on the game scene to go into it. Do we want to save the sample scene? No, we don't. So we'll just click on don't save. And now we are in the game scene. The second scene we need and the final scene is going to be the menu scene. Right click, go create a new scene, and this will be called menu. Now, our menu in this game isn't going to be too complex. We're not going to have a bunch of options to change resolution or anything like that. We are just going to simply have a play button and a quit button. Okay, and now that we have our scenes done, let's go back to our main assets folder here and create the rest of our folders. So next up, let's right click and create a new folder, and this one we are going to call audio. Now, in our game, we are only going to have 2 audio clips that we'll be implementing. You can, of course, include many more if you wish, or include different ones if you have your own custom audio clips that you want. The gameplay for our game, wherever we can move around, jump, kill enemies, that sort of stuff, that is all going to be inside of the game scene. With the sample scene here, we can actually delete this as we won't be needing it anymore, so we can delete that. And then let's just double click on the game scene to go into it. Do we want to save the sample scene? No, we don't, so we'll just click on don't save. And now we are in the game scene. Second scene we need, and the final scene is going to be the menu scene. So let's right click, go create a new scene, and this will be called menu. Now, our menu in this game isn't going to be too complex. We're not going to have a bunch of options to change resolution or anything like that. We are just going to simply have a play button and a quit button. Okay, and now that we have our scenes done, let's go back to our main assets folder here and create the rest of our folders. So next up, let's right click and create a new folder. And this one we are going to call audio.
Ya, coba mic-nya dimatiin kan? Bukan. Ya,
Now, in our game, we are only going to have 2 audio clips that we'll be implementing. You can, of course, include many more if you wish, or include different ones. If you have your own custom audio clips that you want to include in the game, you can. But included in the project files are going to be a pickup sound effect and a weapon shoot sound effect. Now, project files are going to be a pickup sound effect and a weapon shoot sound effect. Now we can go back to our assets main folder here, and the next folder we're going to create is the materials folder. And this is where we're going to be creating our materials for our models. Because when we start out, we're just going to be using capsules and cubes for our models in the game. This is known as gray boxing, and that is what you do before you implement the final models. And for the final models, let's create a new folder here, and we'll call this one models. And inside of here, what we're going to do is, just like with the audio, I'm going to drag in some pre-made assets that are going to be inside the project files. There should be a ammo box and health pack model that you can import. These are 2 custom models. And then for the characters and environment, we're going to be importing 2 asset packs, and these are from Kenny. And Kenny is a public domain site where you can download 2D assets, 3D assets, and these are all public domain, so you can use them in any of your projects. The first one is going to be a character models pack, and these, of course, will be linked down in the lesson summaries as well if you do wish to download these from the website and have a look at all the different models as well. So in the character models here, we just have a bunch of different models here. Actually, we'll go, you have the basic character model here, and then we have the advanced we'll probably just models here. Actually, we'll go, you have the basic character model here. And then we have the advanced character model. We'll probably just be using the basic character since it'll be a lot easy to use. And then over here in the materials folder, we have all of our different materials for our different characters that we can use. With that, we can go back to our models folder and import the next pack, which is going to be the nature pack. And this is just going to have some trees, rocks, just some environment. Mental assets that we can import and use for backdrop, use for defense when we have enemies chasing after us. Of course, you can have whatever you want. There are some other assets on the site that are like cities, space themed, and you can import those too if you wish. But we're just going to be using this nature pack for our environment. Okay. And that is our models complete. Now what we're going to do is create our next folder here in the assets, and this one is going to be called Physics Materials. Now I'm not going to get into too much detail on physics materials right now. Physics materials are used to change the properties of colliders and physics objects. They allow you to change their amount of friction, the bounciness, and basically make it so you can create stuff like rubber, wood, stone, all these different real-life materials that we can implement inside of Unity. And we'll be using these on the player and the environment to basically make it so the player can't get stuck on edges and on surfaces. All right. Next folder is going to be prefabs. So we'll create a new folder here. We'll call this one our prefabs. And this is where we're going to be storing all of our prefabs. All of the things we either want to save so we can use them in maybe other scenes if you have other levels, or things that you want to be spawning in the game, such as bullets. And finally, we can create our last folder, and that is going to be the scripts folder. And in here, of course, is where we are going to be storing all of our scripts for the game. And that's about it for the project files and assets that we will be needing. And of course, you can get these assets from the included project files on the course page. Or you can go to the Kenny website link down below where there will Welcome back, everyone. In this lesson, we are going to be creating our player controller. Now, this player controller will allow us to move around the map, jump, look around with the camera, as well as allow us to shoot our weapon, take damage, and when our health reaches 0, we will die and the game will be over. All right, so here's just some 2 images of what it will look like. On the left is what we'll be shooting bullets from. Here inside the game scene we are, so let's hop into the scene view here. And what we want to do, first of all, is create a sort of platform for our player, because if we create the play controller now, we'll just fall right through in the sky. We won't know if we're moving, we won't know if we're falling. So we need something to stand on first of all, and also something to be able to know if we're moving at all, or if we're jumping. So in here, I'm going to right click in the hierarchy and create a new empty object. And I'm going to call this one underscore map. Now this empty game object isn't going to be anything per se. It's more going to be a container. It's going to be a container that is going to be holding all of our environmental or map objects. All right, I'm going to set to 000 just so it's center and easy to work with. And I'm also going to change my tool to the move tool, because at the moment I did have it on the rect tool. We don't need that yet, so we can just click up here to change it to the move tool. And now as a child of main camera, of the map I'm going to right click on the map and I'm going to go 3D object cube. And this will create a new cube, and this is what we're going to be using for the ground. I'll change the scale to about 20 by 20 by, let's go 20 by 2 by 20. So we have a nice large platform here. And now with that done, we can actually create our player controller. So I'm going to right click here in the hierarchy and go 3D object capsule. And here we go. We've got our player capsule right here. For now, we are going to use a capsule for both the enemy and the player. With later on, we will be implementing the final models, so it does look a bit nicer. Let's set this position to 000 with a Y position of 1, or I mean 2. So that the player is now sitting on top of the cube like so. You may notice that the shadows look kind of odd. It does seem there is this orangey grey tint and the shadows are pitch black. And the reason for this is because of the lighting. We need to go into the lighting menu here. If you don't have this menu up already, you can open it by going to Window, Rendering, then Lighting Settings, and this should open up the lighting window here. And all we want to do is click on Auto Generate down here. And what this will do is auto generate the lighting whenever there's a change in the scene. So we'll just click on that. Shouldn't take too long, and there we go. Everything is set up the way it should be. This may also already be ticked for you, but for me it wasn't, so we just need to make sure that we have auto generate on. All right, with that we can go back to our inspector, and what we are going to do now is set up some materials for the ground. We don't need material for the player, since the player is not going to be visible to us inside of the game. So let's go to our materials folder. I'm going to right click here, go create material, and I'm just going to call this material ground. Oops, ground. And to apply it, we can just drag it on like so. And we want this to be a sort of green grass sort of material, something that could be outdoors. So I'm going to lower this first of all, since we don't need a preview that large. And I'm going to change the smoothness all the way down to 0. Since we don't want it to be really shiny, we want it to be sort of a flat color. And with the smoothness down to 0, let's click on the albedo here, and we're going to change the albedo color to a green. So I'm just going to change it to green, see what sort of green we want. Yep, something like that, I'd say. Let's have a look in the game view. Oh, we can't actually see anything in the game view right now, so let's go back to our scene view. And what we want to do is click on our capsule here, and I'm going to rename this to player. Now let's attach the camera to the player. So I'm going to click on the main camera, drag that in as a child to the player here, and I'm going to set the camera's position to 0, 0, 0, 0. So it's right in the center of the player here. But we want it on top of the player's head. So let's set the Y position here to 1. And if we look in the game view, this is what the player will be seeing. Now, with that done, what we need to do is click on our player and add one more component that we need. Because right now, if we were to press play, or if we would implement our movement and all that, nothing would really happen because there is no physics being applied to our player. If we were to jump up in the air, it wouldn't work. If we're going to walk off the edge, we wouldn't fall over. And that is because we need a rigid body component attached to the player. So let's do that now. Let's click Add Component, and I'm going to find rigid body. And this will basically apply physics to our player, allow our player to fall over, allow us to move by changing the velocity of the player, all the sort of physics stuff that you would expect from a real life object inside of a world determined by physics. But something we do want to do with this is open up the constraints pop down here. And with this, what we want to do is freeze the X, Y, and Z rotation. And the reason for that is because if we were to just leave that alone, set up our movement, and move around, we would eventually fall over sideways. And we do not want our player to be falling over sideways, as that would basically ruin the game for us. We wouldn't be able to get back up. So we are going to be freezing the X, Y, and Z rotations. The Y rotation, we will be manually changing inside of the script for us to rotate horizontally to face wherever wherever we rotate based on the mouse input for the camera look. But yep, we'll just set this freeze rotation here. And apart from that, we should be all good to go. The final thing we need to do is set up a simple little gun model for us so that we can see sort of a visual representation of where we're aiming at. Okay, so as a child of the main camera, and the reason why we're doing it as a child of the main camera and not the player is because if we were to look horizontally, for example, the gun would stay there. But if we look up, we need the gun to also move up as well. So we need to pretty much track wherever the camera is looking. So as a child of main camera, what I'm going to do is create a new empty object, and I'm going to call this one our weapon. And then let's move this weapon forward a bit here. The blue axis is the forward axis. This is where we're looking right now, and this is where we're going to be looking. We're always going to have this blue axis facing forward, which is the Z axis, which is the forward axis. So as a child of weapon, then I'm going to create a new 3D object cube here. It's pretty large, so let's bring it down to a 0.1, 0.1, 0.1 scale. I'm also going to remove the box collider, as we don't need a collider on our weapon, and it might actually interfere with our bullets when we start shooting them. So we can look in the game view now. and see that we have our cube right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the weapon here, and I'm going to position it down so this weapon is pretty much down at the bottom of our screen and a bit to the right. So I'm going to set this Y to maybe negative 0.2. Let's set the Z, let's bring it a bit close to us. We'll go 0.5, let's bring this X to now 0.1, 0.2, we'll set to 0.2 there. And now what we can do is start to model our gun. Now we don't have to be too complex with this model, it's just going to be a nice simple model. So I'm going to get the cube here, and I'm going to press R to go to the scaling tool, and this will allow us to pretty much just resize this however we want. So I'm just going to resize it a bit like that, so it's got a bit of a barrel. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this, and to do that we can just go Control D, and it creates another cube here, which is the exact same. And I'm going to move it on the axis here. So what I can do is click on this red square here, and you see it moves on the x-axis like so. So I'm going to move it down here. Let's actually move the weapon forward a bit for now so I can model the handle. So I'm going to move it down here. Let's actually move the weapon forward a bit for now so I can model the handle. I'm going to press R to go to the rotate tool, and I'm going to rotate it along the x-axis here so it is a bit like that maybe. Let's go back to the scaling tool. by pressing R. Click on the white square to uniformly scale it down or up. I'm going to scale it down about there. Move it back over here. And there we go. We've got our weapon here. Now let's also make a material for our gun. So I'm going to create a new material here in our materials folder. And this is going to be called weapon. And then we can just apply to both of our cubes. So cube 1. And the cube. I'm going to change the smoothness down to 0 again, since we don't want it really to be shiny. And for the albedo, we'll just change this to a gray like so. Alright. We can go back into the game view, click on our weapon, and I'm just going to position it where it looks best. So let's try 0.6 on the x-axis, on the z position I mean. For the y, we'll go negative point, let's say 2. Yep. So we'll just keep it like that for now. And there we go. That is our player controller pretty much set up and ready to go. In the next lesson, we'll start to script our player controller, so we're going to be able to move around, jump, and actually look around as well with the camera. So yeah, I'll see you all then. Welcome back everyone. In this lesson, we are going to start to script our player. So, first thing we're going to do is go to our scripts folder that we created earlier on. And inside of here, we want to create a new C# script, and we'll call this. And inside of here, we want to create a new C# script, and we'll call this one our player. And this, of course, is going to manage stuff like movement, jumping, looking around the camera, taking damage, and then dying. As well as also later on when we implement pickups, it will allow us to give health and give ammo as well. Okay, so let's click on our player here, our player object, and we just want to drag our player script onto the object like so. Now we can open it up inside of Visual Studio by double clicking on the script here. So we're in the script now, and the first thing I want to do is actually start to list out some of the variables that we'll be using, okay? So the first variables are going to be a public float move speed, and this is going to determine how fast we can move in terms of units per second, because Unity works in terms of units, and 1 unit correlates to 1 real-life meter. After this, we then also want to have a variable for our jump force. What I'm going to do as well with this is put it underneath a header. Now, what a header is basically in the inspector where you list out all your variables for that script, a header will sort of split them up with a bold label on top. So it is easier to then look at a larger list of variables and easily identify categories within those. So up here above the move speed, I'm going to add I'm going to add a square bracket. And inside of here, I'm just going to go header, parentheses. I'm going to have some text that just says movement, like so. And what this does, if we go back to the editor and have a look at our player controller after the scripts compile and the light generates, you'll see that we have our move speed, our jump force, and a bold movement tag on top of here. So when we have a large list of variables, dividing them up with these headers just makes it a lot easier to understand what you're looking at, and also makes it easy to identify a variable if you're looking for one. So let's move back into our script now. And now let's add in some variables for the camera. So we can go another header, and this one we're just going to call camera. And this is just going to manage this is just going to be a list of variables that have to do with looking around with the camera. The first one is going to be a public float look sensitivity. And this basically just dictates how fast does the camera rotate around when you move the mouse. A lower value would have a lower sensitivity, and a higher value would have a higher sensitivity. What we also want to do is make it so that we clamp the camera up and down rotation. Because if we go back into our editor, go back to the scene view here, and look at our main camera, let's press E to go to the rotate tool. And what we can do is we're going to be rotating along the the Y axis, so we can look left and right. And that will be infinite. We'll be able to look as far left and as far right as we can. But what happens if we want to look up? And if we keep looking up, it'll get to a point where it flips over like so. We don't want that. We want to clamp the rotation so that it maxes out at about -80, I'd say. So you can look up all the way there, and then as we start to look downwards, we also want to clamp that as well so we don't go all the way back like this. We want to make it so that it's about also 80, so we can have a maximum up look and a maximum down look as well. So let's go back into the script, and we're going to be creating two variables. The first one is going to be a public float max look x. So what is the maximum x rotation that we can look? And along with this, we also want a public float min look x, which is going to be the minimum amount we can look on the x rotation. So with this, we also want to keep track of our current x rotation of the camera. Now, this doesn't have to be a public variable, as this won't be changed manually by us in the inspector. So we can just call this one a private variable, and it's going to be a float rot x. I just add some comments here to explain what each of the variables do. Now let's move. Welcome back, everyone. In this far left and as far right as we can, so we can look left. And what we can do is we're going to be rotating along the x. We start to look down in look x. This won't be x. I just add some comments here to explain what each of the variables do. Now let's move on to our next a collection of variables, and these are all going to be private variables, so we don't really need a header for them. And these are just going to be our components. These are going to be the components on our player object that we can access at runtime. So the first one is going to be a private camera, and we'll call this cam. And this, of course, is going to be our main camera, the camera that is attached to our player that we will be accessing. At the start of the game. As well as this, we want a private rigid body, and we'll call this one ridge. This is going to be our rigid body component, and we need to access that in order to move around and also jump. And that is about it for now. The first function we are going to implement is going to be the awake function. Now, you may have heard of the start function, and what that does is the start function gets called right at the start of the game when the object is initialized. Well, what the awake function does is it gets called before the start function. Now, the difference between these two is that when the awake function is called, it doesn't guarantee that other objects are initialized. It only guarantees that this object is initialized. So in the awake function, you should only really be affecting elements that have to do with that object itself. You shouldn't really be doing stuff like GameObject.find. You shouldn't be trying to access other objects inside of the scene. You should only be trying to modify and change stuff to do with your object inside of the awake function. So in the awake function here, we can just go void awake.